In a museum in the mountains of North Carolina, there is a motorcycle that still runs. On an ordinary afternoon, its keeper will roll it off the floor, flood the carburetor, kick it over and ride it down the road, the same way its maker once did. Then he brings it back and sets it in its place among hundreds of others. To a passing eye, it is one more old American machine, black and low and honest, wearing a license plate stamped 1917. But look closer at the tank. There is a name on it, Traub. Hold on to that name because it is the center of everything that is strange about this motorcycle and everything that is impossible about it. No company ever built this machine. No factory ledger records it. No blueprint in any archive describes a single part of it. It is not a rare survivor of a small mark that went under, because there was no mark. In the entire written history of the American motorcycle across every maker that ever filed a patent or printed a catalogue, the name Traub appears exactly once, here, on this tank. And for half a century after the machine came to light, no one could say who had put it there. This is not the story of a company that rose and fell. It is the story of an object that should not exist, built by a person who left almost no trace, hidden for decades behind a brick wall, and discovered by accident. For most of its life, it has been called a masterpiece with no author. What follows is the story of how that turned out to be only half true, and how the half that got solved made the other half stranger, not simpler. Begin with the wall. Around the end of the 1960s, in an apartment building in the Chicago area, a plumber was working through a renovation. He was breaking down an interior brick wall, the kind of dividing wall that 100 workers had passed without a second thought. Behind it, sealed in the cavity, sat a complete motorcycle. Not a frame, not a pile of parts. A whole machine, upright, waiting, coated in the dust of decades, but intact. The earliest explanation was a family one, and it is worth telling because it is the story that stuck for years, long before anyone tested it. By the account of the building's elderly owner, his son had taken the motorcycle, hidden it in the wall, and then gone off to the First World War, and the son never came home. The machine stayed where he left it, bricked into the building, outliving the young man who had put it there. Hold that story loosely. It is the first version, not the last, and the records that surfaced later tell it differently. And there is a reason the setting matters, because Chicago in those years was not a backwater. It was one of the great motorcycle cities of the world. Excelsior, one of the three giants of the American industry alongside Indian and Harley-Davidson, built its machines there. The city was thick with foundries, machine shops, tool and die men, and engineers who understood engines for a living. If there was any place on earth where a single gifted craftsman could quietly build a motorcycle to a factory standard, in his own time, with access to real tools, it was exactly there. Because once the machine was out in the light, it began to break every assumption a person brings to a motorcycle of its age. The first assumption is that an old machine is a crude machine, that the deeper the years go, the rougher the engineering becomes. The Traub destroys that idea in its own metal. Start with the engine. It is a side-valve V-twin of roughly 80 cubic inches, close to 1,278 cubic centimeters, and it was not stamped out of a factory press. It was cast by hand, in sand. Sand casting a set of engine cases is not garage work. It means building a pattern, packing the mold, pouring molten metal, and then machining the raw casting to fine tolerances so that a crankshaft will spin true inside it. Inside, the pistons were made by hand, fitted with cast iron rings, closed so precisely there is almost no gap in them at all. And this hand-cast engine will pull the machine past 85 miles an hour without strain. For 1917, that is not a modest number. That is a figure the great factory racers of the day chased with whole teams behind them. To feel the weight of that speed, it helps to picture what fast meant in 1917. American racing in those years happened on board tracks, vast wooden ovals banked so steeply a man could barely stand on them, where riders on factory Indians, Harleys and Excelsiors flew around the boards at 80, 90, sometimes 100 miles an hour, inches from a splintering wall. The machines were so fast and the crashes so terrible that newspapers took to calling the tracks murderdromes. That was the frontier of speed, the ragged edge that entire factories poured money into reaching. And a lone man in a workshop, casting his own cases in sand, built a road machine that lived out near that same edge. Then there is the gearbox. The Traub carries a 3-speed transmission worked by a hand lever moving through a gate. And by the best reckoning of the people who have studied it, It may be the first 3-speed gearbox ever fitted to an American motorcycle. Not one of the first. Possibly the first of all. A feature that the largest manufacturers in the country were still working toward, sitting finished and functioning inside a machine that no manufacturer built. And then there is the brake, and the brake is where the story stops being merely impressive and becomes something close to eerie. To see why, it helps to know how motorcycles of that era usually stopped. Most used a single, simple drum arrangement, one set of shoes expanding outward against a drum, or an external band contracting around one. One action, one surface. The Traub does both at once. Its rear brake uses a single cam that performs two opposite jobs in the same instant. As the cam turns, it pushes one set of shoes outward against the inside of the drum, expanding them, and it simultaneously pulls a second set inward against the outside of the drum, contracting them. Two braking actions, inner and outer, gripping the same wheel from both sides, driven by one piece of metal. It doubles the stopping force, and it is genuinely difficult to design and build. And that design has appeared on no other American motorcycle. No rival's version. No patent for anything like it. And it is not one clever part bolted into an otherwise ordinary bicycle shop special. It is the whole machine. The frame, the fittings, the details a factory would buy in bulk from a supplier, here they have the same considered made-to-purpose quality as the engine and the brake. It reads as designed entire by one mind that had thought about every inch of it. So for 50 years, the thing at the heart of this story was not a broken part or a clever secret inside the engine. It was the absence of a person. A one-off machine built to a professional standard is one of the hardest kinds of object on Earth to trace. A factory leaves paper. It leaves patents, part numbers, advertisements, dealer records, angry letters, payroll. But a single man working alone, building one perfect machine for reasons of his own, leaves almost nothing behind him. The very thing that makes the Traub priceless, that it is one of one, handmade, unrepeated, is the same thing that made it, for 2 generations, unknowable. Traub was not a brand. It was, everyone assumed, a surname, a signature on a fuel tank with no hand behind it. And there, for half a century, the story ended. And then it didn't, because the men who came to own the Traub would not leave it alone as a legend. The museum that holds it treated the question like a genuine cold case. And this is where the story turns, because a surname on a tank, it turns out, is not nothing. It is a thread. Investigators went into the old records of the city, the census pages, the draft cards, the trade listings, hunting for a Chicago machinist named Traub, and they found one. His name was Gottlieb Richard Traub. In the 1910 census, he is there in the city, a young man in his 20s, listed as a toolmaker in a factory, living on North Paulina Street. On his draft card for the First World War, his occupation is written in 3 words that land like a key turning in a lock. Self-employed experimental machinist, not a hobbyist, not a mechanic, not a man whose actual trade was building things that did not exist yet, on his own account. And he had left more than a name in a ledger. In 1907, a full decade before the plate on that tank, a magazine called Motorcycle Illustrated printed a letter from a reader in Chicago. The reader enclosed a photograph and the specifications of a motorcycle he had built, and he wrote a line that reaches across a century and puts a living man in the room. He had made the machine himself, he said, engine and all, and he had worked on it for about a year, putting in the time only between 7 at night and 11. The signature on that letter was Richard Traub, a working man, building an engine by hand in the 4 hours he had after the factory closed. The machine he described in 1907 was not yet the monster that would end up in the wall. It was a smaller thing, a 4-horsepower motorcycle with a 55-inch wheelbase, a tank that could carry it 125 miles. But it was the same man at the same trade, 10 years early, already doing the one thing almost no one else did, building the whole motorcycle himself, engine and all. The wall machine was not a bolt from nowhere. It was the far end of a life spent quietly getting better at an impossible hobby. And then there is the photograph. Not of the motorcycle in the wall, but of a storefront, somewhere in early century Chicago, with a hand-painted sign across the top. Richard Traub, motorcycle shop, general repairing. Men stand out front astride their machines. The name that appears exactly once in the written history of the American motorcycle, the name on the tank that no company ever owned, turns out to have hung over a real door, on a real street, above a real man who built and fixed motorcycles for a living. The gearbox, researchers believe, came from Thor, an established Chicago area maker. The ghost had an address. For a channel like this, that could be the ending. Mystery posed, mystery solved, roll the credits. Except that solving the who is exactly what reveals how little the who explains. Because the moment Richard Traub stops being a phantom and becomes a documented man, every fact about him deepens the real question instead of closing it. And the real question was never who built the Traub. It is why the Traub ended up sealed inside a wall, and why the man who almost certainly built it said nothing about it for the rest of his life. Go back to that first story, the son who took the bike and died in the war. The records tell it differently and more strangely. By the documented account, Richard Traub did not vanish into the trenches and stay there. He came home. He lived on in Chicago for decades, dying only in the 1950s, an old man. Which means that for something close to 30 years, a man lived out an ordinary later life, a wall's thickness away from the single greatest thing his hands ever made, a machine engineered years ahead of the factories, bricked into the building, and by every sign we have, he never told a soul it was there. Sit with that, because it is the true mystery, and it is a far lonelier one than a machine with no maker. A machine with no maker is a puzzle. A maker who seals his masterpiece into a wall and then lives beside its hiding place for the rest of his life, in silence, is something else. Why would a man do that? Some who have studied it guess that he simply lost interest, that the great project of his younger years became, to the older man, just an old bike he no longer cared to look at. Perhaps, but a person does not brick an old bike he has lost interest in into a structural wall and leave it standing upright in the dark. That is not neglect, that is a decision, that is and whatever the reason was, it went into the ground with him because he never wrote it down, and the machine, which can be measured and photographed and started on a cold morning, cannot say it either. What happened to the Traub after the wall, at least, can be followed cleanly, and it is its own small comedy of value. When it came out of the brickwork, it was just an old bike of unknown make, and it changed hands the way old bikes did. A neighborhood motorcycle man named Torello Taki took it in, and the price of the single strangest motorcycle in America was a used Suzuki worth about $700. That was the going rate in that moment for a machine that no amount of money could actually replace. In an age when a new motorcycle from a real company sold for something on the order of $300, the rarest of them all went for the price of a used runabout, because nobody yet knew what it was. In 1972 it found a more famous owner. Bud Ekins bought it, the motorcycle dealer and Hollywood stuntman, best known as the man who made the great motorcycle jump in a Steve McQueen war film. From Ekins the Traub passed onward, and in time to Dale Walksler, who built the Wheels Through Time Museum in the mountains of North Carolina. Walksler refused to treat it as a sealed relic behind glass. He took its engine apart when it developed a knock, found a worn connecting rod bushing, the ordinary ailment of any hard-used motor, replaced it and rode it again. Now measure it against the market it belongs to, because value is the language collectors speak, and the Traub breaks that language too. A Vincent Black Lightning, one of the holy grails of the motorcycle world, sold at auction for $929,000. A public record for a motorcycle. A Crocker, the great American V-twin every collector covets, can climb toward $1 million. Those machines have a price because there are others like them to compare against. A market, a spread of sales. The Traub has no price because there is no second one and never will be, and the museum will not sell the one that exists. The most valuable motorcycles in the world are the ones you can buy. The Traub is worth more than any of them precisely because you cannot. In February of 2021, Dale Walksler died after a long fight with cancer. His son Matt took over the museum, which now carries his father's name over the door, and the Traub kept running. By then it had outlived the man who built it, the man who hid it, the family stories that grew up around it, and now one of the keepers who loved it most. That is what this machine does. It outlives the people around it, and it holds its silence through every one of them. And so the name comes back, the one to hold on to, Traub. It came out of the archives after all. It belonged to Gottlieb Richard Traub, experimental machinist of North Paulina Street, Chicago, a man who built an engine by hand between 7 and 11 at night, and put his name over a shop door. The tank does not lie. Every answer the machine gave up led straight to him, and not one of them leads to why. We found the hand that made it. We will almost certainly never find the reason it was hidden, because the only man who knew walled it up, lived beside it, and carried it out of the world without a word. The engineering that made the machine immortal is answerable. The silence of the man who made it is not. If you have ever built something with your own hands, something that took you a year of nights, here is a question worth turning over. What would make you take the best thing you ever made, seal it into a wall where no one would find it, and then live the rest of your life beside it, and never once say it was there? The Traub is not in the end a machine without a maker. It is a maker without an answer. Every week we tell the stories of the machines and the people who built them, the ones history nearly forgot. If this story deserved to be remembered, a like helps it find the riders who would want it, and a subscription keeps the engine of this channel running. And if you want to see another American machine whose engineering ran years ahead of everything around it, there is a story already here on this channel about the first 4-cylinder motorcycle built in America, a machine so advanced it bankrupted the very man who made it. That one at least gave a clear answer for why it was built. His story is waiting for you until the next machine.